Back to work, thousands of protesters calling for his departure continue to occupy parts of the centre of Kiev, and they've set up volunteer defence forces to protect the area, more than 5,000 strong, according to them. Our correspondents went on a night patrol with one of their members.
7 in the evening, and Vadim is getting ready for guard duty. With his comrade Marianne, this 25-year-old from the southwestern city of Chernivtsi will spend the night patrolling the barricades.
Our unit is called Varta Maidan. We keep order on the Maidan.
This flat serves as a dormitory for militants. Thanks to its high vantage point above Independence Square, it's also a surveillance centre for tracking the movements of the riot police.
From this window here, we can see what they are doing. And if they are preparing to attack, we warn the Maidan self-defense organisation.
Via a hidden entrance behind the building, it's out into the cold, minus 20 degrees Celsius.
This is the first barricade. Our guys are manning it and keeping warm by the fire.
Much has been said about the role of far-right groups in the fighting in Kiev, but though they are present and often take the most radical stance, they are actually in the minority.
Here there are just ordinary people who have come to help. No one asked them to, and certainly no one is forcing them or paying them.
Just a few hundred meters from the Ukrainian government's offices, the bottom of Hrushevsky Street is where the worst clashes with police took place. They flared up after the government introduced draconian anti-protest laws that have since been repealed, but not before 2 people died here.
We were taking the wounded out and bringing them to the medical point. And at one point, me and a mate carried a guy out who had just lost 3 fingers.
Things have calmed down since, but these men are still guarding the front.
We won't leave here until the president leaves office. We need to live in a normal country like anywhere in Europe. An ambulance should come when you call for it, for example, in half an hour maximum, not 3 hours like here. We want a normal country.
On the other side, the riot police have their own camp. They also keep watch all night. We head next to the occupied Trades Union House, the protest movement's headquarters. Vadim wants us to meet the head of his unit, Ivan. For years, Ivan worked for the president's party. Last November turned his life upside down.
When the movement started, I was a bodyguard for an MP from the Regions Party. But I decided to side with the Maidan.
Ivan hasn't been home in more than 2 months. He has 30 men at his command.
We make new recruits pass a psychological test. They have to be a help, not a hindrance.
Wearing helmets and carrying makeshift weapons, the Maidan's self-defense teams patrol the occupied areas day and night. A fearsome sight, but one many Kiev residents welcome.
People have the right to protect themselves and their families, their lives. We're talking about self-defense. It's in those terms that most people see things at the moment.
The Maidan today has the atmosphere of a crudely militarized zone, with one great fear hanging over it: the possibility that Viktor Yanukovych will declare a state of emergency and send in the real military to clear the area.
And for more on those anti-government protests in Ukraine, I'm now joined on set by Anna Neistat from Human Rights Watch. Hello, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Now, those protests in Ukraine, they were peaceful for a while, then they turned violent. Who do you think is to blame for the violence? You've recently returned from Ukraine. What did you find?
Yeah, I just came back from Ukraine, and of course that's part of what we try to look into. I have to say that if you look back into what happened in December, we put the blame on the government. The protests were peaceful, the government moved in to disperse them quite violently. As for the events of the last couple of weeks, those were real confrontations. As you could see in your report, the crowd was fairly violent itself, and they were trying to attack the police, so there were confrontations on both sides. Nonetheless, and something that we particularly focused on, there were many people injured by the police, shot by rubber bullets, injured by stun grenades, who had nothing to do with the violence. In particular, journalists and medical workers. That was one of the key parts of my investigation, to establish what happened, because we had a list of 78 journalists who were injured, beaten up, or shot by rubber bullets in those protests. As you can imagine, this kind of number is not just one journalist who can be accidentally hit.
Now, recently we've talked quite a bit about Dmytro Bulatov, his bloody face making headlines across the globe. There have been allegations that some of the violence may have been orchestrated by the opposition. What do you make of that?
There is no question that the violence wasn't just orchestrated, but that the opposition, or at least some elements of the opposition, participated in violence. It has little to do with the case of Bulatov, for example. We do not know who the perpetrators are there, but it is not the only case. There was another case where an activist who disappeared under similar circumstances was found dead, also with signs of torture. And no matter who the perpetrators are, it is the responsibility of the government to investigate these cases and to send a very clear message at a very high level, not just open a police investigation, but we need the president on TV saying very clearly that these kind of cases will not be tolerated.
And who can make him do that? Is there any pressure on him to do that?
That is the message to Ukraine's international counterparts, including the organizations that it's part of, Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, Council of Europe. They are the ones who are now in a position to put pressure on the Ukrainian government to stop the violence, to investigate, to bring the perpetrators to account, because unless this happens, there will be no end in sight to these hostilities.
Now, as we saw in the report, there are fears that the government's next step might be to declare a state of emergency. Do you think that can happen without any bloodshed?
The short answer is no. So far, we have not seen police exercising any restraint, even the police. So we can only guess what's going to happen if the military moves in. There are certain units of the Ukrainian police, not all of the police, but the special riot police, who's been very, very brutal in suppressing this protest. Again, they faced very serious challenges. I'm not going to deny it. But even with those challenges, they should have exercised restraint. They should have not used violence against those who were not violent against them or against others.
Now, you worked in Russia before, I believe, and we've seen that Russia and the EU have traded accusations of interference over Ukraine. There has been talk of Russia staying out of this, although today they had some pretty harsh words for the opposition, but staying out of it until the Olympics are over. Are you concerned that after that, this might take on a whole different tone, that things might get a lot worse after them?
I'm concerned and hopeful that it will not happen. There are rumors, definitely among the opposition, in the crowds that I walked through over the last week. There are definitely rumors that Russia may helping hand to President Yanukovych after the Olympics. I do hope that Russia knows better, because if that happens, that may lead to major confrontations, major bloodshed. It is not going to convince the opposition to leave the streets, but it may only cause further violence on both sides.
Now, you said before that the police had to deal with difficult circumstances. Are there some cases then in which their reaction has been justified, or you said before there are no excuses whatsoever for the kind of behaviour that we've been seeing?
There was definitely, their reaction to violence on behalf of protesters was probably justified. They used some lawful means, such as stun grenades or rubber bullets. They did not use live ammunition. They used water cannons and -20, which is questionable tactics. But in any case, when they're being attacked, when the public buildings are being taken under control by the opposition, they have to respond. What they cannot do is target those who do not have anything to do with the violence, like medical workers, like journalists, like bystanders. And we did document such cases, and this is something that we request the government to investigate and stop immediately.
And another word on Russia. How do you think the handling of this situation in Ukraine compares to how perhaps Russia, which has had a big influence on Ukraine, might handle a similar situation? Because we often talk about Russia being torn between East and West when it comes to police brutality. Is it leaning more one way than the other?
It's a difficult question. It's difficult to speculate. First of all, I think the major difference is the Ukrainian opposition itself and the people who did stay for weeks and weeks on end in freezing temperatures outside. There were some demonstrations in Russia, but I think both the self-censorship of the opposition and the pressure from the government in Russia is much higher. People don't dare to get out in the streets and oppose the government in the way they did in Ukraine. And if they did, I would be scared. I would be terrified. I do not have any reason to believe that Russian police would have exercised any restraint. And so far, what we have seen over the last month, even at a much, much lesser scale, because the demonstrations were at a much lesser scale, there is no reason to believe that they would have behaved any better.
Okay, Anna Neistat from Human Rights Watch, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Time now for a short break here on Live from Paris. When we come back, we'll be going live to our correspondent in Thailand, and we'll have some music news for you in our culture segment. Stay tuned for that and plenty more coming right up.